Ethics versus the pseudo-ethics of theist religion. The opinions and positions taken in this presentation are those of James Young and are not intended to be taken as the absolute, authoritative, or final word on the subject. Be advised that the beliefs and positions of Christians, Muslims, or other theists are not intended to be representative of all of them. I am well aware of the diversity of belief among Christian sects. They are not in agreement on doctrine. Despite that fact, some Christian doctrines will be discussed in this presentation. It is not an attempt on my part to lump all Christians into a single belief system. This presentation does not plan to focus on negative public perceptions concerning atheism and ethics. Atheism is not a philosophy or belief system. Being an atheist says nothing about one's ethical standards or integrity. Atheists derive their ethical standards from a variety of sources of their own choosing, none of which have anything to do with belief in the supernatural. Public perceptions concerning atheists are heavily influenced by negative stereotyping, scapegoating, and dehumanizing propaganda frequently voiced in mainstream media, authored by religious leaders and institutions. The two goals of this presentation: encourage people to think critically for themselves about the ethical and equitable treatment of others who are different. Expose the contrast between the inflexible dogmatic theist approach to ethics as opposed to the more flexible and reasoned approach of secular communities. The terms morality and ethics are often used by ethicists interchangeably. This discussion will use either or both terms in that context. Ethics are controversial. There is no single correct approach. However, most ethicists can agree on some commonly accepted ethical principles. Ethics have to do with distinguishing between what human behavior is right or wrong. This in the expectation that right behavior is not harmful to others and that wrong behavior is harmful to others. Some people think of morality in terms of personal standards, whereas ethics may be thought of as community standards. This presentation will not distinguish between personal versus community standards. Behaviors that unjustly or unnecessarily damage the lives of others are unethical. Behavior that is not unethical is by default ethical and should not be prohibited. This presentation will discuss ethics in general terms of ethical attitudes and standards we should strive to live by versus pseudo-ethical attitudes and behaviors we should strive to avoid. Are we socially obligated to be ethical? Yes, we are socially obligated to be ethical in our treatment of others. Ethics have value to society because ethics are grounded in the concept of mutual well-being. Communities require that we observe and obey many laws. Many of these laws are designed to protect us from others who don't care about the equitable or ethical treatment of their neighbors. We could rightly refer to these laws as ethical mandates. Recognizing pseudo-ethical laws. Pseudo-ethical laws exist under the pretense that they follow the rules of common social ethics, as if involving ethics, when actually not. Pseudo-ethical laws are unethical inasmuch as they legitimize or permit behavior that harm people within the community who dare to be different. These laws are designed to deny freedom, equal opportunity, and social equity to oppressed minorities. Pseudo-ethical laws are oppressive inasmuch as they have no legitimate purpose in protecting us from evil, but rather are a deliberate attempt to impose religious restrictions upon the conduct of secular members of the community. While we are expected to obey these laws, we should be vigilant to recognize that they may be an assault upon freedom of conscience, freedom of choice, individual autonomy, cultural diversity, and freedom of religion. Theist objective ethics claims. Theists claim that God is the source of all ethics and morality. Without God's guidance, they claim humans are incapable of determining for themselves the difference between right and wrong. Theists also claim that God's moral principles are objective. The concept of objective morality is one where there is an absolute and universal right and an absolute and universal wrong. Theists also claim that God can do no ethical wrong. This apologetic reserves for God the authority to do as he pleases, even commit crimes against humanity without regard for the so-called objective moral standards theists claim are obligatory to humans. Theists also claim that the Bible reveals to humanity the principles or standards of God's objective morality. It should be noted that Christians are incapable of providing a universally agreed upon list of God's objective moral standards. Theists also claim Christians or Muslim acting at God's behest can do no ethical wrong in carrying out God's mandates. This apologetic reserves for God's followers the authority to commit crimes against humanity without regard for the so-called objective moral standards these very same theists claim are obligatory to others. As with other problematic theist claims, there is no way to confirm that a mandate to do anything is actually from God. Christians claim that Christians need not fear divine retribution for unethical behavior because they enjoy vicarious atonement for their misdeeds, past, present, and future. This apologetic reserves for God's followers the privilege to engage in unethical behavior without regard for the so-called objective moral standards these Satan theists claim are obligatory to atheists. These same Christians also claim that since atheists do not fear divine retribution for their unethical actions, they have no moral compass or motive to do what is ethically right. Did you notice the contradiction here? Secular ethicist rebuttals to theist claims. Contrary to the assertions of theists, no God or holy book is a source of objective ethical standards. Ethical principles are derived from human experience, are subjective, relative to mitigating circumstances, and subject to change as human cultures evolve. Gods are not entitled to a might makes right ethical double standard that allows them to do evil under the pretense of being righteous. While believing they are acting at the behest of their God, history demonstrates there is no crime against humanity that theists are unwilling to perpetrate. Christians are not entitled to a free pass that allows them to do evil under the pretense of being righteous simply because they believe they are doing God's will or are saved. Ethical principles must apply to everyone. No one gets to reserve for themselves a double standard. The effect of secular ethics. Ensure that everyone enjoys freedom of conscience, freedom of choice, equal opportunity, and social equity in their pursuit of happiness. Protect ourselves and others from those who would willingly harm us for selfish gain. Adopt an empathetic and charitable attitude towards people who are suffering. Teach tolerance with a view to mitigate hate, tyranny, intolerance, and oppression at the hands of oppressors. Expose, discourage, and vilify behavior that unjustly damages human lives. Nurture personal integrity within ourselves. In contrast to the effect of secular ethics, theist ethics ensure that no one enjoys freedom of conscience, freedom of choice, equal opportunity, and social equity in their individual pursuit of happiness. Theist ethics guard against individualism or voices of reason that might inspire or demand change. Theist ethics adopt a hostile or apathetic attitude towards people who are suffering. Theist ethics teach intolerance with a view to promote and legitimize hate, inequality, tyranny, and oppression at the hands of theists. Theist ethics ignore, encourage, and condone behavior that damages the lives of people who dare to be different. Theist ethics ignore the lack of personal integrity within themselves. Let's talk about pseudo-ethical behaviors. Pseudo-ethical behaviors are unethical behaviors thought to be in harmony with the goals of moral ethical standards. However, when scrutinized closely, we discover they undermine and or violate the goals of ethical principles. Let's take a look at the Nazi response to Nazi crimes against humanity. Admiration of the perpetrators, no condemnation of the crimes, apologetic justification for the crimes. And the excuses Nazis used to justify Nazi crimes against humanity? Oh, they had it coming. They deserved it. It was appropriate. It was necessary. It couldn't be helped. It was the right thing to do at the time. Critics don't understand the context and misrepresent the facts. Let's take a look at the Muslim response to Muslim crimes against humanity. Admiration of the perpetrators, no condemnation of the crimes, apologetic justification for the crimes. And what were the excuses Muslims used to justify Muslim crimes against humanity? They had it coming. They deserved it. It was appropriate. It was necessary. It couldn't be helped. It was the right thing to do at the time. Critics just don't understand the context and misrepresent the facts. Let's talk about some biblical examples of pseudo-ethical standards that are actually crimes against humanity. The Bible mandates killing those who work on Jewish Sabbath days. It permits the practice of owning people as chattel property. Yes, we're talking about slavery. It mandates the killing of disobedient or rebellious children. It mandates conquest, genocide, and infanticide. It mandates killing atheists, infidels, blasphemers, and missionaries of other religions. It mandates killing adulterers, homosexuals. It permits human sex trafficking, forced marriages. It permits sex slavery of virgin females taken as spoils of war. It mandates gender inequality and the subjugation of women. It mandates killing astrologers, witches, spiritualists, and fortune tellers. And there are many, many more examples, but this is sufficient for the moment. What is the Christian response to these biblical crimes against humanity? Admiration of the perpetrators. No condemnation of the crimes. In fact, apologetic justification for the crimes. What are the excuses Christians use to justify these biblical crimes against humanity? They had it coming. They deserved it. It was appropriate. It was necessary. It couldn't be helped. It was the right thing to do at the time. Critics don't understand the context and misrepresent the facts. This raises a question. It's something we should think about. When Nazis, Muslims, and Christians describe the moral, ethical bankruptcy of others, aren't they really describing themselves? Who has the moral, ethical capital to condemn the ethically bankrupt actions of others while simultaneously making excuses for the ethically bankrupt actions of themselves or those considered to be their allies? And this brings up another question. Does theism offer an ethical advantage over secularism? Well, theists are incapable of providing any example of how theism offers any moral ethical advantage over secularism or atheism. Atheism is not a religion, nor is it a moral ethical philosophy. It is simply a word defined as lacking a belief in the supernatural. Secular communities tend to have more tolerant and inclusive ethical standards than do religious communities. And due to their divisive and intolerant nature, theist religions are very poor sources of moral, ethical principles. Here are some ethical ideas theists are very uncomfortable with. All people have an equal claim to certain inalienable rights, among which are life, freedom of conscience, freedom of choice, freedom of expression, equal opportunity, tolerance, and social equity. And no law, government, majority, religion, ideology, or prejudice can ethically deny even one individual equal opportunity to enjoy them. Does that sound like a principle that your neighborhood church would post on their bulletin board? The only legitimate application of ethics is without pandering to divisive ideologies that capitalize on differences in race, ethnicity, national origin, philosophy, religious belief or the lack thereof, gender or sexual orientation. We must not subject others who are different to the kind of malevolent treatment that we ourselves do not wish to be subjected to. Is this something that your neighborhood church would post on their bulletin board? Ethics must include an uncompromising commitment to freedom of conscience, freedom of expression, freedom of choice, equity, equality, justice, and tolerance for all. These values must mandate the character of our faith and ethical standards. We must demand in ourselves the same ethical standards we demand in others. Are these something that your local church would be willing to post on their bulletin board? Any behavior that unjustly jeopardizes or damages the quality of life of others is unethical. Any person, group, institution, faith, philosophy, or religion who nurtures hate, bigotry, and intolerance for others who they view objectionably different only because they are different, and attempt to ostracize, disenfranchise, vilify, and or otherwise damage their lives represent the most evil elements of humankind. Are these ideals something that your neighborhood church would be willing to post on their bulletin board? Intolerance of hate, bigotry, tyranny, discrimination, and fascism is the ethical imperative of an inclusive democratic society. It is not an assault upon the rights of any person, religion, ideology, or institution to vilify efforts to practice or institutionalize hate, tyranny, and inequality. Oppressive individuals, institutions, or majorities have no legitimate ethical mandate to impose tyranny upon minorities that pose no threat to the rights or lives of others. Is this a principle which your neighborhood church would be willing to post on their bulletin board? Any person, faith, political movement, religion, scripture, church, or institution whose teachings or policies are divisive, threatening the rights and or quality of other people's lives, should be abandoned. Empathy is the most noble of all virtues. It is only by way of empathy with those suffering, languishing in poverty, ostracized, disenfranchised, or repressed that we can achieve equity in our treatment of others. Are these principles something your neighborhood church would be willing to post on their bulletin board? A single, well substantiated fact, irreconcilable with a belief, is sufficient to prove that belief false. There is no higher authority than reason and critical thinking. To question is the answer. Spiritual growth cannot occur unless we continue the search for better answers from a variety of sources. Institutions hostile to critical inquiry that use lies and sophistry to nurture absolute dogmas only nurture intellectual arrogance, impeding spiritual growth. Are these two principles something your neighborhood church would be willing to post on their bulletin board? Moral judgments require flexibility. Absolute dogmas, pseudo-morality, and inflexible rules fail to serve the interests of social justice. Forgiveness is critical to social equity. When transgressors are sincerely contrite and repentant, they have taken the first steps necessary to redeem themselves. Society should encourage and respect reform. We must not subject reformed transgressors to eternal torment just because their mistakes were egregious or cannot be undone. Are these two principles something that your neighborhood church would be willing to post on its bulletin board? Any person, group, institution, faith, philosophy, or religion who deliberately spreads lies, suppresses truth, spins, exaggerates, misrepresents, or manipulates information in an attempt to manipulate others is ethically bankrupt. Demagogic and simplistic answers do not adequately or equitably address complex problems. There are only natural and human solutions to human problems. Until we are willing and able to solve a problem, it doesn't get solved. Any reliance upon supernaturalism to solve our problems only impedes human progress. Do you think there might be any possibility that the church in your neighborhood might be willing to post these principles upon their bulletin board? Quality reasoning requires that we have and apply a methodology for making an objective distinction between magical thinking versus objective reality. Unsubstantiated claims should not be taken to be inerrant truth. Blind faith does not trump objective reality. Claiming to know things that are obviously unknowable and spreading those claims as though they are confirmed facts is unethical. Is there any possibility that a church in your neighborhood might be willing to post these two principles upon their bulletin board? In conclusion, ultimately, we are the arbitrator of our own ethical moral standards of right and wrong. Hopefully, we will take this responsibility seriously and not allow ourselves to be duped into adopting pseudo ethical standards. While others will attempt to impose their ethical standards upon us, our individual autonomy grants us the right to decide for ourselves what seems to be the best answer to this and every other complex issue. Our beliefs have ethical consequences that impact our lives and the lives of everyone around us.